Elena Carter sat at her desk, staring at the envelope. The paper was thick, almost velvety to the touch, sealed with dark red wax pressed into an emblem she didn't recognize. It had arrived that morning, slipped under her apartment door in Boston. No stamp, no return address. She hesitated before breaking the seal. Inside, a single sheet of aged parchment bore 6 words in elegant handwriting. "Come home. Your past is waiting." A shiver ran through her. Home. Blackwood Hollow. She hadn't set foot there in 20 years. Not since the night her mother, Eleanor Carter, disappeared without a trace. The town was little more than a faded memory. Misty streets, towering oaks, and an eerie quiet that never seemed natural. It was a place where shadows felt heavier, secrets ran deeper, and time moved differently. The train ride to Blackwood Hollow was long and silent. The further she traveled, the more the landscape shifted. Tall skyscrapers gave way to rolling hills, then dense forests that seemed untouched by time. By the time she arrived, dusk had settled over the town. The streets were just as she remembered, narrow, cobbled, and lined with Victorian-style houses that seemed to lean inward, whispering secrets to one another. She found a car waiting for her at the station. No driver, just a set of keys in the ignition. Her hands tightened around the wheel as she drove up the winding path to Ashen Hill Manor. The house stood at the edge of town, shrouded in mist and ivy. It had been abandoned for years, yet it still loomed as though waiting for her return. Elena hesitated before stepping out. The last time she had been here, she was 10 years old. The night her mother vanished. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open, and a slow, aching creak echoed through the foyer. The air was thick with dust, but beneath it, there was something else. Something old and watching. Then she saw it, sitting on the fireplace mantel, untouched by time. Her mother's locket. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen it in 2 decades. When she reached for it, a whisper drifted through the room. "Elena." She froze. It was a voice she hadn't heard in 20 years. Her mother's voice. She had vowed never to return. Yet as she held the letter, she felt something pulling her back, an unseen thread unraveling, tugging her toward the past she thought she had left behind. Elena booked a train ticket that evening. The Hollow was waiting. Elena swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her ears. The locket was warm in her palm, as if someone had just held it. The whisper had felt real, too real. She turned toward the grand mirror above the fireplace. At first, she saw only her reflection, her own wide eyes staring back at her. Then something shifted behind her, a shadow. It moved independently, gliding across the room like ink spreading through water. Elena took a step back, gripping the locket tighter. "Who's there?" Silence. Then slowly, letters began to form on the mirror, written by an unseen hand. "Find me." A chill ran down her spine. She reached out, hesitantly tracing the words with her fingertips. The moment she did, the fireplace behind her roared to life. Flames burst upward, casting wild shadows across the room. Elena stumbled back, and then, just as quickly as it had started, the fire died, leaving nothing but cold embers. But the words on the mirror remained. "Find me." Her mother was here. Somehow, some way, and she was waiting to be found. Determined to uncover the truth, Elena spent the next day searching the house. Her mother had always believed in secrets, that they had a way of revealing themselves when the time was right. It was in the study that she found the first clue. Behind an old bookshelf, she noticed something odd, a seam in the wood. She pressed against it, and with a soft click, a hidden door swung open. Dust filled the air as she stepped inside. The room beyond was small, lined with shelves overflowing with old books, journals, and newspaper clippings. At the center of the desk was a single article. "Local woman disappears after claiming to uncover town's darkest secret." The date? The night her mother vanished. Beneath the headline, scrawled in red ink, was a chilling message. "The Hollow keeps what it wants." Elena's breath caught. A floorboard creaked behind her. She wasn't alone. Elena's pulse pounded as she turned. The study door stood open, the dim hallway beyond stretching into shadow. Yet she was certain. She had heard something. A breath. A step. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the nearest object. A brass letter opener from the desk. It wasn't much, but it was sharp. "Who's there?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. No answer. She took a slow step forward, scanning the dim corridor. The house was silent, yet the air felt heavy, thick with something unseen. Then out of the corner of her eye, she caught movement beyond the window. A figure. Elena rushed to the glass, her breath fogging the surface as she peered out. There, at the tree line where the mist rolled in thick waves, stood a man in a long coat. His features were obscured by the fog, but she could feel his gaze, fixed on her. Then, without warning, he lifted a hand and pointed. Not at the house, at her. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She blinked, and he was gone. The mist swallowed him whole. Elena knew sleep wouldn't come that night. She sat in the study, her mother's locket in one hand, the letter opener still clutched in the other. The weight of the hidden room's discovery pressed on her. Her mother had been looking for something, and now Elena was following the same trail. The floor creaked beneath her chair. She frowned. That sound, hollow. Heart hammering, she knelt and ran her fingers over the wooden boards. One felt looser than the rest. Carefully, she pried it up. Inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth, lay an old map. It wasn't a normal town map. It showed Blackwood Hollow, but the landmarks were different. The river was drawn in the wrong place, streets that no longer existed wound through the town, and at the center, where her house stood, was a symbol, a circle. Inside it, a single word had been scrawled in faded ink, threshold. She barely had time to process it before the candle flickered wildly beside her. And then, the whispers started again. "Find me, Elena." The next morning, Elena followed the map. She traced the old paths through town, noting how the landscape had changed. What had once been a street was now a thick overgrowth of trees. The river had shifted, carving a new course over decades. But the one thing that still stood was the well. It was hidden deep in the forest behind Ashen Hill Manor. Overgrown with ivy, its stone rim was cracked with age. Elena approached slowly, feeling an unshakable sense of familiarity, as if she had been here before. As she peered over the edge, a gust of cold air rose from the depths. Then, a hand. It shot up from the darkness, pale and grasping. Elena staggered back, heart pounding. But when she looked again, nothing. Only the endless black of the well. But deep below, she swore she heard something. A whisper. "Come down, Elena." Elena stood at the edge of the well, her breath shallow. The whisper had come from deep below, curling around her like fingers reaching from the past. Her mother had been searching for something here, and now so was she. She gritted her teeth, secured the rope from the nearby trees, and tested its strength. Then, with one last breath, she lowered herself into the well. The air turned colder with each descent. The damp stone walls pressed in around her, slick with moss and time. The rope creaked under her weight, swaying slightly. She shone her flashlight downward, revealing a cavernous darkness that seemed to swallow the light. Halfway down, she saw it. Carvings, ancient symbols etched into the stone. Circles, spirals, words in a language she didn't recognize. Then beneath her, the ground opened up, revealing an underground chamber. She landed with a soft thud on the cold earthen floor. Her flashlight flickered, casting shadows on the walls. At the center of the chamber lay a stone slab, and on it, a skeleton. Wrapped in decayed fabric, its bony fingers were curled around something, a small, rusted key. Elena reached out, hesitating. And then, as her fingers brushed the key, the whispers returned, louder. "You were never meant to leave." Elena's hands trembled as she pried the key from the skeleton's grasp. The moment it left the bony fingers, a gust of air swept through the chamber, whispering, shifting the dust. She had to leave. Scrambling back to the rope, she climbed, every muscle burning as she forced herself upward. The carvings on the walls seemed to glow as she passed them, as if watching her. Finally, she emerged, gasping for breath. The forest was eerily silent. Even the wind had stilled. Clutching the rusted key, she hurried back to the house. Inside, the air felt different, heavy, almost expectant. Her mother had hidden something here, and now Elena had the key. She searched every locked drawer, every cabinet, until she found the door. A small, unassuming wooden door behind the study's bookshelf. one she had never noticed before. She slid the key into the lock. Click. The door creaked open. Inside was a small, candle-lit chamber. The walls were lined with books, journals, and strange artifacts. At the center, atop an old wooden desk, lay an open journal, her mother's handwriting. Elena stepped inside, heart pounding. The final entry read, "I found the threshold. I know what they did. If I don't return, Elena, don't let them find you. The hollow keeps what it wants." Then, a sound. Footsteps, right outside the door. Elena's breath caught. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. She pressed herself against the wall, heart racing. The hidden room was small, no windows, nowhere to hide. The floor creaked outside. Then, silence. Elena clenched her fists, forcing herself to move. She crept to the doorway, peeking through the crack. The hallway was empty, but then she saw them. Outside, beyond the fogged-up window, figures stood in the yard. Dozens of them. Men and women in old-fashioned clothes, their faces blank, their eyes dark voids. They stood motionless, staring at the house. Elena's stomach twisted. The hollow keeps what it wants, and it wanted her. She had to run, but as she turned, a hand clamped over her mouth. Darkness swallowed her whole. Someone was in the house,